Joey's today's topic gets me so excited for many reasons. One, it brings me back to the very first passive income idea I had all the way back in college, bro. I may have told you about this before, but my first idea, the way that I was going to become financially free by age 35, that's what I told Megan, was I was going to own self-storage facilities. And she asked me the question. My wife says, Russ, how in the world are you going to own it? Where are you going to get the money? I was like, I don't know where I'm going to get the money. She said, and who's going to run it? Because I know dang well you're not. And I was like, my mom. She's like, your mom? Your mom's not going to run a self-storage facility. I was like, why not? It's a beautiful situation. I'll have like the office on the downstairs, and the upstairs, like the upstairs apartment, is where she lives. She lives rent-free for the rest of her life. What an amazing son I would have been.
I mean, just can you imagine a more giving son? Like, I don't think it exists, Russ. That's pretty amazing.
By the way, if you could only imagine my mom, anybody who knows my mom, sweetest lady, school teacher for 30 years, running a self-storage facility, that would have been a no-go. Like when I was a kid, we'd have girlfriends call, right? I had girlfriends call. And I'm like, no, I'm not here. I'm not here. And Mom's like, Russ, I'm not lying to him on the phone. And I'm like, you're messing it up. Like my mom on a phone call would just have been amazing for somebody wanting a facility. But Joey, outside of the stupid dream that I had that never came to fruition, I wish it would have, by the way, why do you believe this is such a great podcast for people to listen to?
Oh, man. Well, I don't know what your investor DNA is, but I can tell you, if you don't like dealing with tenants, toilets, or any of those things, self-storage may be a good fit for you. If you're in the business of taking something and doubling it in value in the next 2.5 to 5 years, you may want to listen up to what Scott has to say. This guy has been around for 30 years in the space. He didn't mention this, but offline, he said he's the OG of self-storage. And after listening to him, I tend to believe it, man. This guy knows his stuff, and he walks you through what you need to know about self-storage deals. If at the very least you can pick up those things and apply them to your next deal, man, there's so much to get out of this.
Yeah, we took a long time through this episode because it's so fascinating. Hopefully you'll listen all the way to the end. But if not, if you're interested in talking with Scott, go to selfstorageinvesting.com. We're going to have Scott come and talk to our group when we're live in Nashville at the end of August. So don't forget to go to wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/live. Get your tickets to that, because maybe self-storage is going to be your pathway to becoming financially free. Joey, let's take nothing more from this interview. Let's jump in right now with Scott Meyers.
Welcome to the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast, your guide to understanding how to get out of the Wall Street rat race and start your own mailbox money lifestyle. Now, don't let these handsome Southern draws fool you. These financial minds are teaching our country to enhance savings, increase cash flow, and create passive income, all without the help of Wall Street. Are you ready to break through? Now here are your hosts, Russ Morgan and Joey Murray.
All right, Wealth Without Wall Street tribe, you're in to learn about self-storage today from the master, Scott Meyers himself. Scott, so glad to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Joey. So glad to be here and to catch up again.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to be on your show, you on our show, lots of conversations. So I know this is going to be a great conversation. I do want to take you, though, back to the moment where you decided to invest in real estate. Everything changed, and there was a reason why. Would you take us back to that moment?
Yeah. So, when I got a job out of college and actually had a little bit of money left over after all my bills for the first time in my life, I began looking at, all the books on how to invest in Wall Street, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. And I read Peter Lynch's book, and I thought, that's it. He just gave me the roadmap, and I'm going to kill it. And so I started buying everything I could get my hands on and learning as much as I could. And but the more that I learned, the more books I read, I found that there was a chapter way in the back, or somebody that had talked about, by the way, you can also invest in real estate, with retirement funds or outside of that. And then the more I dug in, I recognized that, the wealthiest people in the world didn't make their wealth on Wall Street. They made it in real estate. And so I began to go down that path of, looking at what it meant to, supplement my retirement or have a hedge to that, at least in bricks and mortar, something I could see, touch, and feel that also produced income. And that made sense because one of those books that I read was also Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And so I was maxing out my 401k at work. I was working for a Fortune 500 company, and then we headed into the dot-com crash in 1999. The company I worked for was one of those that made it onto the news because they were cooking the books. And overnight, Wall Street doesn't reward; they punish those that cook the books. And so overnight, I lost $350,000 of my retirement. And so that's a pivot point. That's a reflection point, Russ. And so
that's a bad day is what that is.
That's a bad day. That's a bad day, no matter how you look at it. So my wife and I sat down and began to put pencil to paper, and we'd been kind of kicking around the thought that our real estate business was beginning to take off, and so when I began to put pencil to paper, I thought, how many hours did we spend last year doing real estate part-time, this part-time hobby of ours to supplement retirement, and how much cash is that throwing off, and what's our hourly rate? Because we never looked at it in terms of an hourly rate from cash flow. We'd only looked at it as a supplement for retirement and building that nest egg. And so we began to look at the hourly rate of how much we were making in real estate from the cash flow versus how much money I was making working at this W-2 job. And it was quite a bit higher. And the retirement piece was the real estate because it was building value. Somebody was paying off the real estate, paying down the principal, paying it off, and I would have that asset for retirement, just the same as we had before. And so we put a plan in place to replace my income, with the real estate. And so, if we were doing this on the weekends, what would happen if we devoted 40 hours a week to it? Well, then, of course, it wasn't 40 hours a week. Then it was 60 hours a week when you started, because that's what it took to begin with. And we learned those lessons along the way. But to answer your question, that was, it was a dot-com crash, and that caused us to do the math exercise and to recognize that, not only is our retirement going to be decided by us, but so is our income. We're not going to let all of this be befallen to somebody else making decisions instead of us.
I love the transition there. Like, you didn't just immediately have all the lights turned on. You were just kind of starting to slowly get there. But what was the real estate you were investing in to begin with? What types?
Yeah. So this is back in 1993. I've been in this business for 30 years now. And so the first rental real estate that I purchased were single family houses. And we were buying these with assumable VA mortgages. And I don't think there's any of those left around any longer. And so we took a home equity loan out on the house that we had, and we bought one of those and did the Burr method before it became the Burr method or coined as such, rehabbed it, refinanced it, rented it out. And then we took that capital, the equity that we built into it out, and then we bought two more on VA assumable mortgages. And so then the two turned into 4 to 8. And then I think we were up to about 20 houses. And then we didn't have that freedom in the cash flow. It was 60 hours a week plus. And we struggled along the way, maybe a little more optimistic, and maybe didn't set realistic expectations or do the math correctly, perhaps. But it wasn't allowing us the freedom and the flexibility and the money to do what we wanted to do or achieve our goals. And so I thought, well, I just need to double down, and economies of scale will fix this. And so we bought some apartment buildings, and really, that helped a little bit, but at the end of the day, just kind of amplified the problems that come with rental real estate that involves habitational real estate and the tenants and toilets. And we're getting to that place where we're hiring property managers and property management companies, but it was just a slog. And at the end of the day, even when we have those folks in place, the buck still stops with us, and all the things that people do when they live in your real estate, we began to just kind of get a little frustrated and kind of tired, and we began to lose faith in our fellow man. And at that point, we decided maybe we need to take a look at something else. And so, well, what is there in real estate, rental real estate, that doesn't involve people? And it's either parking lots or storage. And so that was my wife's suggestion. Is, she knew I was running the Central Indiana Real Estate Investor Group. We had 600 investors in our group in Indianapolis, and she had been talking with a couple that was younger than us in self-storage, and they had smiles on their faces, and they weren't stressed out, and they were able to go on a cruise because they didn't have to have a cell phone, because there's no tenants, there's no toilets, there's no plumbing, there's, police don't show up for, any, the junk doesn't fight with the junk next door, things like that. And so we began looking into the business, and man, I loved what I saw. And that was all it took. If somebody doesn't pay, we have lien laws, not habitational eviction laws. And if they don't pay, you lock them out and you sell their stuff off and you recoup your money. And then the turn is blowing out a metal box that's sitting on a concrete slab. And it was like, that's it. So we sold, methodically sold all the houses and apartments, and then just went full bore into self-storage. So it found me.
How many of us listening to this are like, yes, please, yes, right? Like, I mean, I tell the story of my first piece of real estate, and it was because of the 2 months in when the neighbor upstairs flooded my unit, and my $97 a month was quickly evaporated. My CertPro bills, right? Like it goes
for 6 years into the future.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's so much nicer to think about. Man, I get something and they stay, right? Like, talk a little bit about that. I mean, like, why self-storage is so important. One, you said I don't have to deal with the people, right? But also talk a little bit about the stay rate. Like, what is the occupancy rate, the retention rate of customers inside of self-storage?
So we, that's interesting. We just had a mastermind, and one of the folks that we bring in is actually from your neck of the woods, one of our consultants. And he gave a presentation with the new set of numbers from last year and tracking all the data. And he geeks out on that, and we're thankful because of it. And now it used to be roughly anywhere between 9 to 12 months was kind of the average length of stay. And now we're between 14 to 16 months. And there's a number of reasons behind that. And again, that's the average. Because we've bought facilities where some of these clients are, they're not tenants, they don't live there, but our clients or customers, they've had their stuff in there for 7, 8, 13 years. They just, and sometimes it's really literally just junk. Sometimes it is treasures. Either way, some of those folks think that they're junk or treasures, and they just continue to pay to keep it there because they don't have room in their house, or it's just easier to write that check or let it ride on the debit card rather than trying to figure out, how to sell it or how to throw it away. And sometimes it's heirlooms, even though it's just really, an old couch that was given to them when somebody passed away. They just can't get rid of it. So there's a number of reasons, in addition to small businesses that they keep their inventory there. They don't operate out of that facility, but they operate out of Starbucks, their truck, or the kitchen table, and their inventory, their business is located at the self-storage facility because it's cheap warehouse space and it's small. It's flexible. When times are good in the economy and people are moving, or they're renovating, the basements or their whole house, they put stuff in storage. I mean, there's a number of needs, and really we're kind of in the demand. We're a demand-based business, so death, divorce, bankruptcy, people downsizing, we call it the D's of self-storage. Anytime that there is a life event, we're in the kind of the trauma and transition business, and there's always trauma and transition. And especially when we head into a recession, that puts a strain on businesses and individuals, and businesses and individuals downsize and they put their stuff into storage when they do so. Or if businesses have to close, they put stuff into storage. Or if somebody gets kicked out of the house because they were doing something they shouldn't have done, their stuff goes into storage until they figure their life out again. And so for those reasons, that's why people enter into storage. And then for the reasons why they stay, that's really varied.
Well, and I know you talked about stepping into self-storage as like the very first one. It's not the last one that you ever did. Talk about your now like kind of rise to fame in the space of self-storage.
Well, my rise to fame looks exactly like it did when I began. It's because the same business model has been replicated, and we've been doing it over and over and over again since 2005 when I got into storage. And it's buying Class C facilities in the secondary, tertiary market and improving the operations, leasing it up, raising rates, adding technology to reduce the payroll and the expenses, doing our best to mitigate taxes as much as possible, doing cost segregation and reallocating our taxes, structuring things differently, creating value, adding ancillary income streams like selling renter's insurance and locks, boxes, moving supplies, adding U-Haul agencies, all those things to just maximize the NOI, and then either refinancing and pulling some cash out to go buy more, or to sell, or to what we've got, the place that we got to now. I guess what has changed, Joey, is that we're now aggregating. So the big roll up, the big scaling up in our industry is, the race is on. in our industry in self-storage, there's 80% of the facilities are still owned by mom and pop, whereas multifamily, assisted living, mobile home parks, they're more mature, and it's really the opposite. 20% is owned by mom and pop, is 80% is owned by the REITs. The good news for us is if we buy them right, we create value in them, and then we roll them up, then we can sell them for a higher multiple to the REITs, to the bigger national players. And so that's what's changed. And then, along the way to grow to where we are right now, we had to get really good at raising private equity and syndicating and creating funds. And so that's the piece that we've added on to fuel the growth. And then also to get yield, we learned how to develop. And so we brought on a number of folks in the industry that partner with us in joint ventures, the general contractors. Sometimes we just contract them on our own. We do a lot of joint ventures with our general contractors, our GCs, and doing anything and everything as we learn how to put a deal together in the capital stack to make sure it's profitable for everyone, including our first and foremost, our investors. So long-winded answer to your question, but we do lots of things in self-storage in addition to teaching people how to do it as well. And because my computer's not working, that's the only that's the only picture I could put up on it right now. As we do have a podcast, and so we're just building a community of people that are doing the same things that we're doing, and at scale, and all learning and growing and doing it together.
So when you say Class C, I don't want to leave anybody behind, especially my business partner in here, in tertiary markets. Break that down just a little simpler for us.
So, major MSAs, that is Miami, that is the New York's, capital cities, the larger cities. And I forget there's, roughly, for real estate purposes, the top 50 MSAs or metropolitan statistical areas, the largest cities in the country. And then you have the suburbs, that would be secondary, and then tertiary, that's just a little further outside of the suburbs. It's not necessarily rural, but it's just heading a little further out. It's where there's still growth coming, and that's where we want to operate in. There's still, a number of folks that are there, a critical mass of people in order to make the business work that actually utilize storage. But we want to follow the pipes, if you will, where they're going, where the path of progress is. And if they're building a new ring in the highway system around the city, that's where we want to be, is further on the outskirts and in the path of progress. Class A facility, that's the 3-story gleaming facilities located right next to the highway with the lights shining on it, all temperature controlled, with all the bells and whistles on it, state-of-the-art security, fencing around it, 1.5 to 2 staff members inside, professionally dressed. Class B is single story, maybe in the suburbs, very nice facilities, maybe temperature controlled, professional management. And then the Class C is a little further out, the mom and pops that owned many, many years ago, haven't kept up with the times. The guy behind the counter maybe wearing a wife beater tank top and chewing on a cigar, nothing professional about, and may or may not look up when you walk in the door. But those are the types of facilities where we know that there's, if they don't have a website, we'll add one. If they have one, we're going to make it professional, and we're going to put a professional salesperson behind the counter and do everything to drive the NOI. Whereas some of those owners, they've just become, just happy. They don't have to raise rates, and it's paid off, it's paid down, and they're doing fine, and they don't have to really lift a finger. It just churns out cash. But we can come in and we can turn up the wick on those facilities, and those are the ones we can really make an impact on.
Joey, what he's saying is the place that I passed on buying met all of those criteria. It was way out here where Starlink would be required. Secondly, the guy behind the counter definitely was wearing a wife beater, and I don't know if it was a cigar in his mouth, but it was definitely smoking. I'm just saying we missed on an opportunity, I think.
Well,
you did.
You just had your wife beater on right before the show. That's not, this is your type of deal. But Scott, you mentioned something about cost segregation analysis for self-storage, and I've only really heard that applied to multifamily or even single family. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about, I don't want to get into the super weeds, but
sure,
in general, what kind of a value does that provide to your investors when you implement one of those?
Yeah. Well, I won't get super into the weeds because I don't understand when we get super into the weeds. That's why we hire the cost segregation consultants and the engineers to come out. So essentially, within the tax laws, we have the ability to be able to write off under Section 179 things that we can depreciate and accelerate it a little bit sooner because the useful life is a lot shorter. And many of those items that are really not necessarily considered capital expenditures or, the structure itself, but there are some of the moving parts that we can depreciate a lot faster. So for us, that just means a bigger tax write-off sooner which means more to the bottom line sooner, which means that we can then go redeploy that capital. For our equity partners that come alongside of us in our syndications and in our fund, many of these folks are coming into our projects and they've got huge capital gains that they want to offset. And so if we can pass that depreciation through at an accelerated rate to them, that just makes our investments more attractive to them as well. And so with self-storage, in contrast to multifamily, and I'm not beating multifamily up. I made a lot of money in multifamily. I didn't do as well as I would have liked to have, and I'm partial to self-storage. However, the stats are the stats, and we can write off in some of our facilities up to 80% can be depreciated in year one when we can do that under the CARES Act. But at the end of the day, we still it can find and dig in because we got. When we build our structures, guess what? The walls move. We can depreciate those faster. They can be detached and we can move them back and forth. The doors, same thing with the roll-up doors. They're not a fixture. The building, the shell, and the roof is. And the asphalt and then the fence around it, but everything else inside of it, which means that, roughly 80% of it, depending on how old it is and how worn down it is, from the gate itself to the security system, much of that can be written off in year one or in a very short and accelerated time frame. So yet again, I have my top 10 reasons why I love self-storage over the other asset classes I invested in, but that's just another one. And that's a real big one.
No, that's super cool. All right. I want to break down maybe some key elements when you're considering buying a facility or even, developing or whatever it may be. There's probably 3 or 4 items that you're like, must have these things.
Yeah.
I definitely want to talk about that because you talked about the ability to expand a second ago, right? I know that that's important when probably, especially now that you're competing with the big dollars out there, finding a property is probably getting a little bit harder, the ability to expand. Talk a little bit about that and what other elements do you believe are needed in order for you to make the decision to purchase?
Yeah, boy, there's a lot of them. So, but I'll boil it down to the biggies as you asked. When we're looking at an existing facility, we want to make a 2 to 2.5x return when we exit on a property, and that's usually within 5 years. And that's for ourselves and also for our equity partners. In order to do so, we need to be able to build value into it. And the best way to build value in real estate is, from a development standpoint, is you start with a piece of dirt, and then you put a building on it and an income stream, and that's how you create a lot of value. But in an existing facility, we look for, again, many of those mom and pops that, they left a lot on the table. It's still got a lot of horsepower left in it that we just need to tap into in terms of the operations and how to grow the income, add income streams, reduce expenses. But if it's got an acre or two, that's already zoned, that's part of it, and they just decided not to build on it, the zoning's in place, and we just need to bring the buildings and put them in. That is the quickest way because we're buying that piece of property based upon the cash flow in place, which in many cases, we really get that land for free. The bank's not going to lend on that, or at least not too much. So that is the best way. The caveat to that, however, Russ, is that we have to look into the market. There are some folks out there that think, we know that the average occupancy across the United States and stabilization for storage is 93%. And so I found this facility over here, it's only at 65%, which means that I'm going to buy it and I'm going to take it up to 93. And here's the numbers I can extrapolate. But what they failed to do is look into the market then. And they didn't realize within their market, which is really just a 5-mile trade area, because that's all the farther that people will typically travel to their stuff, that it has been overbuilt. It's oversupplied. And everybody's at 60 to 65%, and they keep lowering their rates, trying to undercut. And we all know that in the race to the bottom, the first person there loses, they don't win. And then they drag the rest of the market down. And so you may buy a facility at 65% and you see the national averages here, but if you never have the ability to do so, then guess what? You bought it stabilized. And if you were betting on taking it to a different place, you need to look into the market, then you shot yourself in the foot. Likewise with the development, very similar, but really that's driven by rates. I mean, it's driven by competition and the supply index. If that's a lot of competition, the lower the rates. But if we find the rates are really low, I can get the land for free. by the time I put a building on it, and pay for that capital, to borrow that money to get it, to fund the operations, to get it up to stabilization or break even, well, it may take me 5 years in a bad market versus 2 years or 2.5 years in a good market. And I may run out of money and the project just, implodes before I get there. So it's all about the rates in development and the supply index. It's about the supply index in a strong market. And then, in a macro sense, is it growing? Is there growth in that market? Is it declining? Has it been declining, which means it's going to continue to spiral downwards and you're not going to be able to raise rates. And pretty soon your customers are going to be leaving. And I think probably the biggest mistake that people make, maybe not something that I'm looking for, Russ, but I think the biggest mistake that people make is that they just don't understand how to underwrite and they don't understand how to properly construct their capital stack. Where's their cash coming from and are they borrowing it? Even if it is friends and family money, when's the rate going to reset? When is their loan due? Where are interest rates going to be then? And are they realistic and being able to create enough value when it comes time to refinance in a market that we're in right now where rates have doubled and the LTV is 65%, where 65% at 8% interest rate, and they bought it at 90% at 3%, 3.5% interest rate. Well, many times that doesn't pencil out if you didn't create a ton of value in the past 3 years, and they may be losing their properties. And so I think being realistic and looking, a little further down the road, I mean, to sum it all up, we all know that we make money in our investments when we sell. But in real estate, you've got to plot the path of profitability and understand what your exit strategy looks like and the timing of it and what the market is going to look like at that time, instead of just, being a gunslinger and just praying and hoping for the best.
If you've listened to our show for any length of time, you've heard us talk about infinite banking and how we were able to use that concept to create over $50,000 a month in passive income. But it's just not that easy to figure out, how does this all connect into my own personal system?
Stallion, that's why we created the passive income operating system, bro. It shows you how to turn active income into passive income. It makes all the steps come together. If you would like to get access to it as a podcast listener, we've never given this away in public before. Go to what'swhatwallstreet.com/PIOS. There was nothing worse than walking into class when you're in school and the teacher saying, "Pop quiz day." Why? Because you were unprepared. Are you unprepared, though, for financial freedom?
Don't be. Find out how close you are by taking our 30-second quiz at wealthwithoutwallstreet.com/quiz. I'm going to jump in with a question Russ was too embarrassed to ask you, so he was texting me this. What breakdown for a supply index? Like, you throw that around, and I don't want to just gloss over and assume people know what that means.
Okay. Well, I'll make it. Yeah, I can't get into that game and start criticizing you. I was going to say I'll make it elementary for you, Russ. That's only up to you. We don't know each other well enough.
This is totally okay. Our audience is used to us just shooting, shots across the bow here. So pick a side. But I'm just saying, if you're going to pick a side, it's gonna be rough on you.
I'll behave. I'm not going to come into your living room and kick my shoes up on your table. Supply index is just that. I'm sure most people understand it. It's demand versus supply. And so, we've got some baselines in self-storage that we follow. And again, my folks that are listening that are in self-storage just say, yeah, Scott, but for years it's been somewhere around 7.5 to 8 square foot per capita in a trade area in a market. So we define our trade areas as roughly 5 miles. The closer you get to the interior of a city in the urban areas, it's maybe 3 miles. And, like downtown where the high rises are, people aren't going to travel more than a mile to their stuff. So let's say within a 3 to 5 mile radius, it's 10. There's 10 square foot of self-storage per person per capita. You could say that it's it's oversupplied or it's getting oversupplied. It all does depend upon the demand as well. There's areas that do have more demand. Florida doesn't have basements, and if it's an area with a lot of smaller houses, row housing, or apartments, higher concentration of apartments, there's a greater demand for storage. But all things being equal, if you're in that 10, 12, 14 square foot per person, you're probably not going to get the rate sheets you want, and there's going to be a lot of competition. Conversely, 4 square foot per capita, again, all things being equal, you need to look at the rental rates, but that's most likely a good market that is undersupplied and underserved, and is a good place to expand or develop.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. Getting the cookies on the lowest shelf for me is so helpful. All right, here's a reason why. So there was a property that literally was a mile from my house. I mean, it was at the very front of the neighborhood where I'm at, and I looked at it, but the biggest concern I had was who's going to run this thing. I know I wasn't going to run it, and the guy in the wife beater smoking whatever he was smoking, I did not want him running it. I did not feel confident that was going to work out well, because the guy who wanted to sell it actually was a friend of mine. His dad had just recently passed. He inherited it. He didn't know what to do with it. He didn't want to run it, and he was nervous of that dude. And so I was just thinking, like, how important is it to find an operator, find a manager to run these sort of places?
Let me draw an analogy here, or tell a small story. And we've seen a number of folks that, the expense load at a self-storage facility, we try to be in that, all things being equal, our $1.5 million to $2 million dollar deals that they're, 250, 300 units that are in those secondary markets. We need to look at payroll because it's our second highest line item next to property taxes. And unfortunately, what many folks do is they try to reduce that as much as possible. And so they want to put a warm body behind the desk. And so who are you going to hire? Well, the more qualified person, the higher the salary. And as a percentage, it just takes away from the overall value. Sometimes it, doesn't meet your debt service coverage ratio, or just less money in your pocket. So they'll look around the landscape and they'll say, well, the gal that cut my hair last week, she's really nice. I could see her doing very well behind the counter here, and she seems like she's on it. She's held her job for at least 3 months. I think I'll hire her. I can do this for $12 an hour, part-time, no benefits, and here's my bottom line. And if you take a step back, and it's just like, you just put a hairstylist or somebody you met at the hostess stand or at the men's suit shop behind the desk at your $2 million investment, and you are tasking them to grow that investment to a 2x return to be worth $4 million in 5 years. Is that really a strategy that is achievable or realistic? So therein lies the, where is that balance? You've got to get somebody in there with the proper incentives that has a sales mindset. They're selling from the phone to get the person into the facility, and then they're selling them on the unit, and then selling them on the upgrades, locks, boxes, moving supplies, anything else. And they have to have that sales mindset, and you have to answer the phone. This is a commodity. They're not looking at school systems or anything else. This is close. You picked up the phone. I need storage right now. I'm not going to spend a week shopping around, bring my husband back and, look at this and that. And I need a place for his stuff, and I need it to do it today because I got to pick up the kids. And so you got a 10 by 10. It's clean, secure, cameras. I took a look at it. We can move stuff in on Saturday. Done. Sign me up. Here's my card. I got to make a phone call. I'll be back in 2 minutes. That's what the transaction looks like. But so you've got to have a person that feels that sense of urgency, but also does kind of somewhat understand business, or at the very least, you need to make it very simple and give them 3 things that they need to be selling for, and then you incentivize them to do so.
Man, that you broke that down so simply. That makes so much sense. And I do think people make that mistake of putting the wrong person behind there, because I called that place forever, because it also subbed as a U-Haul facility. And I don't know if that was a plus or a minus, but just trying to get a U-Haul from that place, the person would never answer the phone. Well, imagine if I was trying to get a storage room in there. That clicks for me, having that urgency, being autonomous, being willing to be flexible and adjust to certain environments. There's a lot of things. We use a thing called the culture index whenever we're hiring people into our company. And I would see like how vital it would be for that specific role to make sure you have that person.
100%.
I would love to go into a case study. I'd love to see kind of how from start to finish a project has worked, just to help Joey be able to understand, right? Like help him make sense of this deal, because I know after we get off this call, it's going to be like, Russ, the next thing that needs to be on our passive income report is self-storage. So let's walk through a deal. Yeah.
So let me try not to blend them together. What we're looking at right now is something that we've done in the past. I've been investing for quite a while, and now also in self-storage, and it's interesting. And I'll just make this, call it a public service announcement or whatever you want to take away from it. Maybe wisdom from the past. When I began investing in self-storage, we were at 8% interest rates. And, so we were buying and we had to create a deal. I mean, there isn't low hanging fruit. You can't go to the self-storage store and just buy a 10 cap deal that has a 2-point spread versus the interest rate. Deals are made. They're not found. We create them. We make them. We know what to uncover and seek. But also, sometimes if we can't get to that price, and if something doesn't pencil out, that means that, well, guess what? We can do this on terms, especially if it doesn't pencil out enough and the bank won't finance it. And so we've had to dust off, and looking forward to and digging into dusting off our seller financing techniques. And that's what we've done in the past, and we're getting ready to do that again. And many of the investors that are listening, I'm sure are very well aware of that. And so we're putting together a deal. Well, we put together a deal recently that included just that. We had this was a mom and pop facility where we knew that it was going to be difficult to get this thing across the finish line because the seller's expectations of value versus ours and essentially the market's value was completely different. Well, my neighbor and I talked to somebody, in our investment group, and they sold for X, $200 a square foot, and this is a Class A facility downtown, and he's over here and hasn't done maintenance in 5 years, never raised rates, and it's completely different. And so when we entered into that project, we said, well, we're interested in the facility. It's in the area. We've got others in the facility, and it would be great to add into our portfolio. We could manage it well, run it under our brand. And so we're interested as long as the price is right. And so tell me, where are you selling? And we always know heading into a project like that, anything's for sale, including my wife, if the price is right, that's not your don't want, or that's not a place to start negotiation. Or, somebody's sick in our partnership, or a spouse is sick and we got a small amount of time left and we're going to sell and enjoy our time together, or we depreciated it, or we're going to trade in, trade up, that there has to be a compelling reason. And his reason fell in between that, and that was competition was coming. Some of it was from us. That's why he reached out to us and other places, and he was just scared. He was just generally, nervous about the marketplace. I should say, not scared. And so he recognized that it was time to test the waters. But his books and records were in unit number 204, some in the back of his truck, some of it in his ex-girlfriend's place. And, we couldn't put together, a solid set of books and records and underwriting to even take to a lender. And what we could piece together, again, simple, predictable business model, we pieced together, what the P&L was. Industry averages, we've been in the business and a lot of it's public knowledge anyways. We knew what the property taxes were. We could see the money that he was bringing in. We were 90% of the way there with that. We filled in the rest. But the amount that he wanted, just didn't pencil out. And so we took off our sales hat and put on our consulting hat and just said, hey, we're not your buyer anymore at this price. It's just not going to work. As you see, and we show them our underwriting, the debt service coverage row isn't made here. We just, no bank is going to take it and won't appraise for this. So if you want that price, if you have to have it, you've got two options. We can work out something with terms and then get you perhaps close to that price, but you've got to give us some better terms and maybe delay some interest or lower the interest rate. The good news is you still get money for the property. You don't have to rent it anymore, and you get more than you would if you just sold it outright because you get interest on it. The biggest buildings downtown here are the ones that are owned by the banks, and that's how they do it. So if you're interested in that, we can show you how. Otherwise, we could also help you and show you how you can raise the value, because that's what we do. That's what we've done. You've seen our facilities over here that we've done very well with. We'll show you how to raise the value of your facility. And then, a year from now, when we come back to you, we may be able to get you this price. And so by that point, they're ready to sell. They've, most likely in a position they've already spent the money that they think they're going to get for their facility. And so it's just a matter of working out the terms. And so, we're bifurcating. We bifurcated the purchase agreement into the property and then the business, because the beauty of self-storage is that you have an operating company and a property company if you want to split it up that way. And so we bought the real estate. And that is what we recorded on the tax roll, because we were going to have a hefty increase in property taxes. And that was one way in our underwriting that we could diffuse that. And then we purchased the operating business on terms. And it started out at 0% for 6 months because, hey, we need that cash flow because, in a polite way, you haven't done any maintenance on this thing, and we need to fix this, and this until we get to the place where it's cash flowing so that we can pay you the payments. And then it's going to be 2% for the balance of this year. And then it's going to go up to 4%. And then it's going to go up to 6% in year 3. And at the end of year 3, we will cash you out. We will refinance, or we may do something with it, but we will cash you out 3 years at the most, but most likely we will do something before that. And that was a deal structure that worked for him. He didn't have to pay a lot of capital gains taxes because he was the bank. You guys are very familiar with what that looks like, obviously. And he did get cash at the table for the real estate. And he had built up enough equity because he'd owned it for a number of years that it made sense. And so that is, I would say that's a cookie cutter type deal that you can construct in any given time with just a couple of little nuances and things that we've learned along the way, and just conversations of getting to know what the seller's motivations are and doing anything and everything you can to meet them there and making sure that the deal still works.
I'm going to go ahead and disagree with you. There's nothing cookie cutter about what you just explained.
Correct.
Especially if you can use the word bifurcating. Russ is still like he's using his foot to move the dictionary right now. Just to find
I would try to type that one in. Tertiary was hard enough for me, Scott. That one, I'm not even going to try to replicate. You don't have to explain it. We know Scott is an expert in this area.
No doubt. No doubt. And but that's really cool. Now, what's the expectation on that deal? If you could bring the future to the present.
Yeah.
We're assuming a lot. I'm not holding you to it, but I just would love to hear that's the beginning of the deal. In your mind, what's the exit?
Yeah, you asked that and I didn't answer it. Typically, especially if we're bringing private equity in, but in this case, we're not. But we're looking for a 2 to 2.5x, 2 to 2.5 times return, within 5 years. And that model typically works when we're raising private equity and for ourselves. So if we're buying it for $1 million, then within 5 years, we need to be exiting at $2 million. And a small property like that, we should be able to move the needle and sell it within 2 to 2.5 years to be able to turn that around, the operations, maybe do an expansion and lease some of that up. But ultimately, that's really what we're looking to do. So we're not... we're not going into the self-storage retail store and picking up something off the shelf that's 90% occupied and rates are at the top of the market. That doesn't do any of us any good. It doesn't help us achieve our goals. It's certainly, from the beginning, we had to do that if we were going to be able to replace an income, and allow me to continue to do what I'm doing and my wife to continue to raise the kids. We're swinging for the fences. We had to hit, triples at least, if not home runs and grand slam home runs, and they're out there. And we know how to find them, and we also know how to create them. So that's, I guess in a rough framework, we need to be exiting at 2 to 2.5 times return within 5 years.
That's so cool. Well, I'll tell you what, this has definitely got my wheels turning, Russ. I know that I'm going to be hitting you up after this to figure out how we're going to get into the self-storage game. But man, Scott, thank you so much for being willing to come on and share your expertise with us, and just how others can be involved in this. If people want to connect with you outside of the community, I know that you'll be in the app and be available for people to talk to you, but outside of there, what would you encourage them to go to?
Yeah, the link is on the screen for those that are watching right now, but selfstorageinvesting.com. That is really literally all things self-storage, because we do all things self-storage. We teach about the business. We have seminars. We do joint ventures, but everything about how to learn to do it on your own. Multiple resources, free resources, white papers, software that you can pull down and learn about what we're doing. In addition to that, passively invest, which I know is near and dear to the hearts of folks that are here as well. You can kind of reverse engineer and take a look at what we're doing, just to get another business model to be able to learn from, to see how some of the folks are doing it in self-storage. And don't forget to check out our missions page as well. We're doing some pretty cool things with what we've been able to achieve, and the success and the resources that is now granted to us by God in this industry as well.
I love that. And by the way, Tribe, we are working on getting Scott to come and maybe talk at the Inner Circle Live event in Nashville in August. So show some love his way. Maybe we can all encourage him to show up, and maybe you'll show up with us and hear about self-storage, because I think this is so fascinating. And the more we understand, the more we know if we want to take action. Does it fit our investor DNA? So Scott, on our passive income matrix, we don't have self-storage storage is one of our options. So we're going to have to spend time with you, pick your brain, and figure out what would be some of those things to help people connect to, so they understand if this would be a great fit for them. Thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure and fascinating listening to you.
Yeah, my pleasure, Russ. Thanks so much. Appreciate everything that you and Joey are doing. It's always good to spend time with you guys, and look forward to the next time we're in the same room together.
Likewise. Well, thank you for listening to this podcast. If you found value, please stop what you're doing, unless you're driving, and take time to rate and review the show. That's how people find us, when they get to see that this is a show that others are liking. And that's how the intranet works, Joey. That's how they move us up the ladder, so that they will actually share it with other people. I know we're in the top 1% of podcasts. I want to be in the top 1% of podcasts, because people just like you who've taken the time to share it with other people. We always appreciate you listening. Have an amazing day.
This has been the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show to break free of the Wall Street mindset and begin building wealth on your own terms in places you understand, so that your wealth will never run dry. See you next episode.